Hi everyone, welcome back to the shop. Now that I've got the shop pretty well set up, I can start building some actual projects. In this build series, we're going to build a bedside table. If you want to follow along with the build, I've drawn up a set of plans. Check out the link in the description below. The material I decided to use for this build is hard maple for the top, the legs, the face frames, and then maple plywood for the shelves and the carcass. And then for the drawer front, I decided to go with cherry just to give it a little accent feature. The tools I'll be using for this build are the TS55F, OF1400, MFK 700. Then I'll be using the DOMINO to do some of the joining, RO150, ETS EC 150/3, the DTS 400, CXS, the Carvex jigsaw, our Capex, Vaxis, and of course, CT48 dust extractor. Now that we've talked about the design, the material, and the tools, the next step is going to be to break down the hardwoods with the TS55, the guide rail, here at the mobile MFT cart. To make all these rips, I'll be using the TS55F, parallel guides, and a guide rail. If you have any more questions about using any of those, check out the link in the description. The material is 3/4 or 18 millimeters thick. For that, I'm going to be using the TS55F with the 42 tooth crosscut blade. It has the 1.8 millimeter kerf, so I'll be able to rip through this just fine, give me a nice, clean, glue-up ready edge. As you see me do on a previous build series, if I'm ripping narrow pieces, I'll just take one piece, slide it down underneath, push the other one forward, and then I've got support for the saw and the guide rail to make my next rip. Those two pieces ripped, I can go ahead and take it over to the Capex and cut them to length. I'm going to cut them just a little bit long, about an inch total, ½ inch on each side, and then when it's all assembled, I'll cross cut it with the TS55 to make it perfectly square. Now I have them all cut to rough length. Next step in the process is to get the boards laid out so that the grain looks the best. I try and get some of the grain patterns to match up. If you notice, we've got a inclusion here, and that'll add a little texture to the top. I'm going to put that towards the back, so if I do put a lamp or something up there, that gets covered up. Everything else looks pretty good. Then once I have that lined up, I'll go ahead and draw a triangle. You can draw whatever you want on here, but that way, when I go to take it apart, put the glue on here, I know that when I put it back, all those lines need to match up exactly the way that I wanted it. For the glue up process, I could use the DOMINO joiner to put a couple mortises in here to join those together. I don't need to in this case. Only time I'd use the DOMINO is if these boards had a bow to them. But when I put glue on the long grain here and long grain here, clamp those up, that's going to be stronger than any mortise and tenon or biscuit or any joint out there. Let's go ahead and get this top glued up. So now I've got this glued up and in clamps. We'll go ahead and set it off to the side. Next step in the process is to mill down the lumber for the legs. Material I'm using is 1.5 inches thick because the legs finished dimension is going to be 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. But because of the flare at the bottom, I want them to be ripped slightly wider to 2 inches so I can use the template, the Carvex, and the router to get it to that final dimension. I'm still going to utilize the 42 tooth blade that comes with the TS55F. Because it is a thinner curved blade with the new blade design, it's going to allow me to get a nice clean cut, and the saw will have plenty of power to make it through. While this board is up here, I'm going to go ahead and use the same 1.5 inch thick material to rip down the decorative rails to match the solid rails on the front and the back. With all the rips done on the thicker stock, I can go ahead and set these aside for crosscuts later. Now I can focus on the 3/4 inch material that's going to act as the face frame material on the front and the back. Now I have all the maple ripped down to size, we can focus on shaping the legs. So as I mentioned before, our finished leg dimension will be 1.5 by 1.5 square, but at the bottom we're going to have that little flare. What I did is I've gone ahead and made a template that I'll use to route that flare into these legs. First step in the process is to cut the legs to length. So with the legs cut to length, the next step is to get the shape onto the legs. I've gone ahead and I've made a template that has both the inside and the outside shape of the leg. I put in blocks to position the blanks. I can just put the leg in here. I can then trace the outline on both sides of the leg, cut off the excess with the TS55F and the Carvex. Then I can put the leg back in here, use the router to finish shaping the leg. So the next step in the process is to remove as much of the material as I can with the TS55 and the Carvex before we take it to the router. To do that, I've set up a stop block, 2 clamping elements that will support the material. So when I put my guide rail on here, it doesn't slide this way, it doesn't slide that way. I've got support for my guide rail to cut with my TS55. If you want to learn more about the TS55K, check out the link in the description. I'll be using the cordless Carvex to trim off the rest of the material on the legs. If you have any questions about pairing a Bluetooth battery with one of our CT dust extractors, check out the link in the description. As you can see, it's not a very pretty cut right now, but once I run that router bit along that template, it'll be perfectly smooth. So with the legs all roughed out, I can go ahead and use some double stick tape to affix the legs to the template, then use the 1400 router with a 1/2 inch bottom bearing template bit to clean up the legs. For this application, I'll be using the chip catcher that comes with the OF1400 router. It's designed to be cut away so it can accept longer bits like I'm using in this application. So I have it set up right now. So I'll do the outside part of the flare first on all the legs, and then we'll spin the template around and I'll do the inner part of the flare. This is one of my favorite steps in the process where you can see a rough piece of material turned into a more refined shape. Now I can rotate the template around and do the opposite side. So with all the template routing done, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little light sanding to get rid of any of the chatter marks that were left behind by the router. I'm using the RO150 with a hard pad so I can get a nice crisp, clean edge when I'm sanding. First round of sanding I'll be doing with an 80 grit abrasive. Now I've switched over to 120 grit and I'll finish off sanding the legs. So now we have those edges sanded, the next step in the process is to do some roundovers on 3 of the corners. Now we'll go to layout to figure out which corners are going to get the roundover. So if we take a look at the prototype, these are the legs with 3 rounded corners, but I also made a mistake and did that 4th corner where the panel meets the edge of the leg. I don't want to do that on these legs, so layout is crucial. So what I've gone ahead and done is pick the best 2 legs for the front, and I've laid them out to where we've got the front legs and now we've got the back legs. And I've labeled them back right, back left, front right. I can put X's where I don't want the roundover where that panel is going to meet, and then I can round over the other 3 edges of each leg. One thing to keep in mind is on the inside corners of all the legs, I still want to round over right up to where the carcass starts. To do these roundovers, I'll be using the MFK 700 with a 1/4 inch roundover bit. One thing I want to make sure I do is on the bottom of the leg, I want to round over all 4 corners. That way, if you're moving the bedside table around at some point, it doesn't catch an edge and tear out. So we're done with the legs for now. The next step in the process is moving on to preparing the material for the carcass of the bedside table. The first step in the process is creating a straight, clean edge to reference off of for all my measurements. If you want to know more about breaking down sheet goods, check out some of the other build series we've done in the link in the description below. Now we can move on to cross-cutting all of our rips that we just did. If you want to know more about setting up the MFT or doing cross-cuts with the MFT, check out the link in the description. So the first step in the process is to square up this factory edge. With all the carcass pieces cut, we can label them front and back, left and right, and also do the same with the legs to then move on to joining the 2 together with the dominoes. When I was working on the legs, I labeled all my legs so I knew which panel they would go to, and I also knew which edge to leave square. Now I can mark out the left panel and right panel and know that now I have a square edge that's going to line up with each panel on the inside. So now it's just a matter of laying out for the mortises. I'm going to have 3 mortises in total. Coming down from the top, 37 millimeters, I'll use the flap on the domino. That'll be my tight mortise or my alignment mortise. Then I'll have 2 more, one in the center, one in the bottom. Those are going to be loose. And as always, I always mark where the mortises are going to go. These are just for reference. so that as I'm doing the dominoes, I can see exactly where I need to put my mortises. So I have everything laid out, and I've got the inside of my panel facing up, and I've got the inside of my leg facing up. And I want my leg to be flush with the inside. That leaves me with about a 17mm reveal on the outside. I'm going to be using the Domino DF500 with a 6mm cutter. I have the plunge depth set to 20mm because I'll be using a 6x40 tenon. I have the fence height set to 20mm as well, based on the 18mm plywood that I'll be plunging into. Now I'll do the same thing on the other side. When I laid out all the mortises for the side panels, I came off the top 37mm and the bottom 37mm because that's the distance from the flap to the center of my cutter. On the legs, I can only reference off the top edge because down here on the bottom, I've got the tapered leg. So what I can do is measure from the top of my panel down to where that 37mm mark is, transfer that from the top of my leg down to the 37mm mark. That'll give me the location for that mortise. And to keep everything consistent, I'll be doing the same pattern of the mortises, tight at the top, loose in the middle, loose at the bottom. With those mortises complete, I can do a dry fit. With this panel done, I'll go ahead and move this over, and then I'll do the other side. Now I'm going to lay out the back panel, or the back side of the drawer, for the mortises that go into the leg and the back panel itself. On the back leg, when I joined the side panels, I came down 37mm for my first mortise. So on the back panel, I came down 60mm and 140mm. That'll offset it so I don't run into the other mortises I made. With all the layout done for the back panel, I can go ahead and make those mortises. Both of them are going to be loose. So with this one fitting good, I can go ahead and do the other side. While I still have the drawer back in place, I'm going to use it as a reference point to lay out for the bottom of the drawer enclosure. That'll be the next step in the process. I'll go ahead and label the back, the top, and the front. Take the legs off, and then I can mortise in place, and I'll have my first shelf. Gone ahead and I've changed to a 5mm cutter because I'll be using a 5mm by 30mm tenon. Switched my plunge depth to 15. I'm going to put 2 mortises in, one tight, one loose. Go ahead and do that, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now I need to do the top and the bottom shelf, then I can switch to the other panel. To lay out the top and the bottom panels of the bedside table, I have to remember that I'm going to have an offset. So once I put my panel in here, then I put my face frame, I allowed for about a 3/8 inch reveal. To get that, I want to be 8mm past my panel onto my leg. So I can just use an 8mm tenon, get my spacing right, lay it down here, get 2 marks for 2 mortises, and then I'm ready to go. I've kept the cutter the same and all the other settings the same. Both of these mortises will be loose. When I start to lay out the bottom panel, I want to take a few things into consideration. With the leg on here, you can see that when I put my face frame on, I want the bottom of my face frame to be about even with the bottom of that bend. To do that, that's going to move me up about 18mm or 3/4 of an inch from the bottom. And I still want to maintain that 8mm offset onto the leg. So when I fold that down, get my 8mm offset, mark 2 mortises, make them both loose, and I'll be ready to go. With the bottom panel clamped into place, rather than using the flaps or a reference mark, I'm going to use the fence of the domino to position the mortises. With all the mortises for the shelves and the right panel complete, I can do the same process on the left panel. So with the dry fit looking good, everything went together nicely. Next step in the process is to take it apart, and I'll glue the legs to the sides, and then I can start prepping the top. So last step before the final glue up, I'm going to do a little bit of light sanding to remove any pencil marks with the ETS EC 125/3 and a hand sanding block. I've made sure to relabel my legs on the top where I won't be sanding, and I've also relabeled the panel on the bottom of the panel so I know how it goes back together. For the finish sanding, I'll be using a 120 granite. There's a lot of different ways to approach the glue up process. I prefer to put an even amount of glue on the tenon before I put it in the mortise. So with the sides and clamps, I can go ahead and take the top out of the clamps, sand it down, trim it to size, and then route the edges. So I'll be starting out with a 60 grit granite, jump up to an 80 grit, and then 120 grit to finish it off. So now I've got the top sanded to 120. The bottom side I only sanded up to 80 grit. It'll never be seen, so that's all I need to do with that. Finish preparing the top, I just need to cut it to the correct width. The depth's already set by when we rip these top boards to the precise length. So I'll square it up and cut the other end. With the top cut to size, now I can work on the edges. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch round over bit on this version. The prototype, I use a chamfer bit. I'll do the top and the bottom, and then the sides and the front, but I'm going to leave the back because that's where it butts up to a wall. So with the top completely finished, I can set that aside and start assembling the carcass. I've gone ahead and I've pulled the side panels out of clamps. Before I go to assembly, I'm just going to do a little light sanding to get rid of any of that glue residue, and then we can install the shelves. So my process is I'm going to get one side completely glued up, and then I'll lower the other half on top of that. This can be a little tricky to line up. That's why I always do a dry fit before I apply glue. So with this out of clamps, it looks good. I'm going to do a little light sanding of any glue residue that's left behind or any pencil marks, and then we can start working on the face frames. I'll be using the DTS 400 with a 120 grit granite abrasive. So now I've got the sanding complete, I can work on the face frame material. And similar to the prototype, I'll have narrow stock up top, a wider face frame here and here. I've already ripped it the correct width, I just need to cut it to the proper length. Tested that first piece, it fits great, so I'll cut the other two exactly the same length, and then we can get them installed. To secure these, I'm going to be using some glue and a headless pin nailer. Even though I'm using a headless pinner, there's still some nail holes left behind. Depending on the type of finish you use, there are plenty of good wood fillers out there that will blend in with any finish you choose. For the decorative pieces on the side, I want them to match up with the face frame on the front, so I'll bring those lines right across here. Now that I have it cut, before I attach it, I want to ease some of the edges with a piece of 150 abrasive. So with all those pieces installed, next thing I want to install is the top. To install the top, I'll use the DOMINO to create two mortises on each side. Then I'll run the screws through those mortises to allow the wood to expand and contract over the different seasons. Using a 5mm cutter, and I've changed the depth to 20 so it'll go all the way through the plywood. So I've gone ahead and I've evened up the spacing both on the sides and the front. Now I can attach the top to the carcass itself. Next up in the process is to install the drawer. I've gone ahead and built the drawer. Now I want to install the drawer slides. For a drawer this size, I like to install the hardware on the cabinet itself first, and then the drawer. If you want a more in-depth look at drawer box construction and installation, check out the previous build series in the link in the description. With the drawer installed, next step in the process is to create a raised panel. But we're going to do it with the TS55F instead of a table saw or a router table. I've gone ahead and cut the piece of cherry to fit the opening with a slight reveal around all 4 sides. When the raised panel is complete, I want it to be flush with the face frame. So I'll go ahead and make a mark. Then I can adjust the jig to cut that with the TS55F. To create the raised panel drawer front, I've created a jig that rests on the material supports of my MFT cart that will hold it in the correct position so that it's flush with the MFT, which will allow the guide rail to sit right on top of the material. I've beveled the saw to 18 degrees. That will give me a nice, even support to cut that bevel across the entire top of the board. Once the board is clamped in place, positioning the guide rail is crucial. I want to make sure that I'm 2 millimeters past my line on both sides, so get some sort of stop that you can check it with. That way you can have the same reveal all the way around the board. I'm switching out to the clear plastic viewing window just so I have a clear view of where I'm cutting. With the top of the panel cut, I can go ahead and cut the opposite side. With having my square set to the same exact dimension as I cut the first side, then it's just a matter of butting up my splinter guard to my guide rail, clamping it down, and now they'll both do the same. Now I can switch over to cutting the short sides. I created another jig that's going to hold me flush with the MFT, but also square up and down. As I mentioned before, I could use a table saw or a router table to create the raised panel. But because of the size of the shop I have, the track saw takes up less space and it still has the accuracy and the precision that I need for this application. With all the cuts complete, I can do a little bit of light sanding and then install it on the drawer. I want to use the clamping elements to hold this in place while I do the sanding, but this thickness is less than 18 millimeters, which is the thickness of the clamping elements. So all I need to do is just cut a couple shims, put those in place. I can still use the clamping elements and it keeps it out of the way of the sander. I'll be using the DTS 400 with 120 grit granite. For installing the drawer front, I've gone ahead and put some double-sided tape on the drawer box itself. Then I have some playing cards here that I've used as spacers to get a nice even reveal around. With the drawer front installed, the last thing I need to do is install the drawer hardware. That just requires one center line from left to right, top to bottom, drill a hole, and put the screw in. I'm really happy on how this bedside table turned out. For right now, I'm going to leave it raw until I decide exactly what type of finish I want to put on it. Thanks for joining me on this build series. I hope you picked up a couple tips and tricks along the way. If you have any questions or ideas for future build series, let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next project.